Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 6th Utility Advisory Commission. We will start with a roll call, starting with Zoom.
Commissioner Croft here.
Great, and then
Commissioner Forcell here.
Commissioner Motter here.
Here.
Okay. Commissioner Scharf here.
and Commissioner Siegel is here. So we have a quorum and we'll move on. There was one change to the agenda, the item number 2, which is a discussion of the CLEAN program rules and requirements will be deferred to another meeting. And other than that, are there any public comments for an item not on the agenda?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. We have one hand raised. David Cole, you may speak.
Thank you, commissioners. I want to relay a story to you that's all too often true. Just today, I've been helping my neighbor with electrification issues. I got her through the heat pump water heater program. And now she's wanting to get an EV and get a charger installed. She's been trying for 7 weeks to get a permit through the city permitting department. And just today, I was able to help her out by copying Chief Building Official George Hoyt and Director Jonathan Layett and City Manager and City Council members as well. But this had gone on for 7 weeks. And this is punctuated in that I just received a communication from utilities saying, here's an electric vehicle workshop, here's your heat pump water heater program. So I thought that you should know about what the permitting department is doing to our electrification program. Without my help, the ordinary person does not have access to these types of people to get this figured out. Now, they did turn it around in a day, but left to their own devices, this would have gone on longer and longer until either she quit, installed it without a permit, or decided to give up on an EV completely because she wanted to get the charger in first. To bring this back to you, Commissioner Forcell had asked several meetings ago to have an update on what was happening with permitting brought to the UIC so that you could review this. And I'm suggesting that this needs to happen every 6 months so that there is some visibility and pressure put on the permitting department. Otherwise, left to their own devices, they seem to think that there's not a problem there. Or I don't know what they think, but it needs to have some other review than being left to their own devices. So I'm hoping that you can supply that visibility to the process such that they can improve it and continue to improve it, especially on these items of electrification and SCAP priorities for our planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Are there any other comments from the public? Great. We will move on to the minutes. Are there any changes or comments to the minutes from last meeting, February 7th? I had 2 small changes, actually. On packet page 8, it says, Mr. Batchelor replied that while trees were not in, Mr. Batchelor replied, trees were trimmed if they were close to the lines, but it didn't actually respond to my question, which was about trees being inspected. So I think we should add, Mr. Batchelor replied that, and then add, while trees were not inspected as part of those inspections, when they were inspected, trees were trimmed, etc. Just to make clear that the trees were not inspected, and that was actually the question that Mr. Batchelor was answering. It's the second to the last paragraph. And then my other little change is on page 11 of the packet, which says Chair Siegel opined the low rating on maintaining modern and reliable infrastructure was due to Palo Alto's high Tesla penetration. I don't know if it was. It was just a might be. So just to be clear that that was just one possibility. And with that, I don't think there are any other changes, so we can approve the minutes with those minor changes if I have a motion to do that
Motion to approve the minutes
with those changes.
with those changes. Sorry.
Second.
Second.
Great, and we'll start with Commissioner Croft at home.
Approved.
Great, and then
Approved.
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 and I approve as well. Great, thank you. So we can move on to Director Batchelor's report.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. Good evening, Commissioners. Few items here to talk a little bit about our hydro update. With the recent storms and participation that the snowpack levels in Northern California from as of March the 4th are just about average for this time of the year. The Central California, they're about 10% below average. However, the levels in the reservoirs are still slightly above average due to the wet weather conditions that we had last year. And the city's hydro resources are projected to produce about 107% of the long-term average and the output for this fiscal year, and about 101 of the long-term average levels in 2025. Good news on the water supply as well. January, February brought significant wet weather to California, measuring a positive impact to the regional water system, shortage projections, participation in this close long-term average, and the shortage of the Hetch Hetchy system is above average. The city's water supplier, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, does not anticipate any kind of water shortages for this summer. And the wholesale water rates, however, are projected to increase about 6.5%. Resulting from an increased cost of containing low water sales in the region. Final water supply conditions and the numbers will be released in the April final rate increase sometime maybe in May or June. So we'll get our final numbers from them, but we're anticipating a 6.5%. Heat pump water heaters. We would hit the milestone. The city's installed 202 heat pump water heaters through the full service program and has another 22 scheduled for installation. Of these projects, 66 customers have applied for on-bill financing. And we produced a rebate applications of 65 heat pump water heaters since October of 22. 9 of those occurred in February. Staff recently released a request for RFP. An emergency water replacement service proposal are due back to the 22nd. So one of the issues that we've been talking about is that how do we deal with the customer that has a water heater, that has a gas water heater that went out tonight, and how do we get the heat pump water heater installed as quickly as possible? So one of the remedies that we are talking about, and we're putting an RFP out on the street is that we will replace it with a gas water heater for a short period of time, however long it takes to get the heat pump water heater put in place. Then as we go through this, they will hold those water heaters. And as we see a demand, then we will go ahead and use through this RFP as installers that will actually come out to the home, replace it on the spot as a borrow and lender for right now. And then we'll hold that for the next one that actually occurs. So we're hoping to see that by the end of March. We'll get an RFP back from some installers and some for replacement services. A little bit of just about a little lengthy on this is electric EV programs. Since the launch of the CPAU's EV program, a total of 297 EV ports have been installed throughout Palo Alto. The infrastructure has been installed at 12 multifamily properties, 18 nonprofits, including 8 high schools, 5 medical facilities. The good news is today is that we have about 4% of the multifamily housing done and have Another charging, we're on track to meet the SCAP goal that we set for ourselves by access for about another 6% for a total of 10% multifamilies by 2025. Of those completed, 5 were recently installed and are now online. These include Stanford Healthcare parking garage at 1189 Welsh, Lucer Packard Children's Hospital parking lot, and 3 other completed sites at condo complexes. Currently, 54 EV projects of the 42 sites are participating in the EV Technical Assistance Program, which is EV TAP. Staff also collaborated with other stakeholders to expand the EV chargers, including installations. We've reached out to private schools, faith-based organizations to gauge their interest in EV chargers throughout the city. We're partnering with affordable housing authorities, 2 of their multi-properties to install EV chargers at apartments at Colorado Ave and Rascadero Road. Facilities partnerships through California Energy Commission, CEC grants, an EV match to install chargers at a mixed-use property at 755 Page Mill and residents, community, and public. So again, we're doing a lot right now. We're trying to reach out to mostly the multifamily and low-income areas and seeing what kind of grants that we might be able to get with that. So we've done fairly well with this. It's far from being complete, of course, but we think that we're actually on the right track at this point. There is a limited EV discount. February, Palo Alto residents were eligible for discounts to select battery EVs and plug-in hybrids through the city's partnership with nonprofit Cool and Earth and Ride and Drive Clean program. The discount savings were up to $18,500, were available at the car manufacturers by Hyundai, Kia, Volkswagen, and Volvo. Online car realtor produced the vehicles participating during the region and limited time program. CPAU plans to offer 2 more EV discount campaigns, as well as 2 more e-bike discounts as well in 24. A little bit on what's going on with Sanitary Project 31. This is the project that's going down the El Camino and Page Mill. We started this back in 23, the summer of 23. We replace, which replaces the sanitary sewer pipeline. And we are about, I'd say at this point, we are just about 3/4 of the way done with that project. We are not working anytime, no more night shifts as we did before. The contractor's been on, has brought on another contracting crew. Most of that work is still being done between 9 and 3. And the city has a webpage information about projects, cityofpaloalto.org/utilities projects, weekly news updates, dedicated email inboxes and phone numbers for the community members to contact if they have any concerns or questions. And the project is scheduled to be completed by somewhere around May timeframe. So we're moving along with that for that project. A little bit more about outage management system. All the customers with mobile phones and our utility billing records were automatically opted in, and we received text notifications through the city of the power management system. We've had up to 7 folks that have opted out, that they did not want to be notified by texts. We're going to begin testing another possible feature of the OMS, which is automatic phone call recordings that can be sent to the customers who do not have mobile phones. So one of the concerns is that I had spoke to an elderly customer that doesn't have a cell phone. That was wondering and doesn't really have emails. We haven't offered emails yet, but she was wondering how she could get a phone number up on that. So we are working with the manufacturer about how we can get these recordings sent directly to the customer's home when there's an outage in their areas. A little bit of just about some upcoming events. Again, it's cityofpaloalto.org/forward workshops. Sunday, March the 10th is Electric Car Right for You, in-person class outdoor EV Expo at Mitchell Community Center. Staff will also be promoting the heat pump water heater program at that event. Wednesday, March the 20th from 5 to 6, new EV owners. It's a Zoom webinar. And then Friday, March the 23rd is the Nature Garden Workshop in person at the Rinconada Library from Embarcadero Room. And then the last one is Sunday, April 21st, 1 to 4 is Earth Day. Everybody is invited to come out to Rinconada Library for Earth Day. And then just one of the recent events, February the 25th, staff participated in Lunar New Year hosted by the Wiz Chinese to promote to the city's heat pump water heater program and EV discount campaign. Staff talked to over 50 Palo Alto residents about financial incentives available for the city and state. Also, too, is that I have to apologize up front that as Chair Siegel talked a little bit about the CLEAN program, was my hesitation or my due diligence not thinking about this and trying to be too fast with when we put this on the agenda, that we did not know, we weren't able to notify and putting onto the agenda 72 hours ahead of time, and that we violated the Brown Act. So that's the reason why we were not able to hear it tonight. Again, I apologize for that. Should have thought about that a little better before I was able to put it back up on the agenda. The plan is that we want to have this heard. We want to go to council on the 18th. And there's two biggest items on there, as you saw, is to talk about the extension from 1 to 3 years, as well as the rate structure portion. I think are the most important pieces in this report. Earlier today, you probably received an email from Kaylee about doing a doodle poll to see when people might be available to have a special meeting to discuss this. I'm thinking that it's probably a 30 to 45 minute conversation and get your feedback on those, mostly on those two topics, but the whole program itself as a whole. So again, my apologies for trying to rush this through and trying to add this to today's agenda and then trying to pull it back off again. So sincere apologies for that. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Batchelor. We'll move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is a discussion of the wastewater rates. Are there any comments from the public?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. There's one hand raised. David Cole, you may speak.
I think that was left over from previous item. I have my hand lowered at this time and do not wish to speak on this item. Thank you.
No other hands raised.
Thank you. And do we have a report, presentation?
Yes, good evening. My name is Lisa Belier, Senior Resource Planner, and we do have a presentation for the wastewater utility. Let me just give me a moment while I pull it up on the Zoom screen. So tonight we're going to talk about the wastewater, all the utilities, but starting with wastewater and then electric. Before we go into wastewater, I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief overview. I know you had a very large packet with a lot of information in it. What we're going to try to do is focus on the changes from when we came to you in January with a lot of some similar information so that we can try to highlight for you what has changed and ask for your feedback on the revisions to our proposal. Since we came to you in January, we incorporated your feedback. We went to the Finance Committee in February with the preliminary rates, and heard some feedback from the Finance Committee, and largely they were supportive of our proposals. And so we'll say a little bit more details as we go through each of the utilities. This is a series of rate increases and rate changes that allow these utilities to invest in the system in Palo Alto for the benefit of the residents and businesses in Palo Alto. This is to make the system more reliable and to allow the city to meet its sustainability and climate action goals of the council. In order for the residents and businesses in Palo Alto to have a reliable and modern system. We're also proposing changes that will allow us to maintain and replace the infrastructure, including the water distribution system and the wastewater collection system, and pay toward rebuilding the wastewater treatment plant. This set of proposals will provide financial stability and allow the city to manage the rate at which rates change going forward so that we can provide financial responsibility when unexpected events occur. Additionally, I wanted to point out that Palo Alto's rates are favorable in comparison with PG&E. PG&E has proposed some increases or has increased rates at the beginning of this year for electric and gas. And based upon our projections for the current year, Palo Alto's gas average median residential bill is 10% lower than PG&E's, and for electric is projected to be 50% lower than PG&E's. So with that, I wanted to, in January, we gave you an overview of our proposals in an overview slide, and I wanted to just show that overview so you get an overview of the different proposals that we're going to be speaking about. So here, what is the key points to focus on is in the red box for fiscal year 25. That's the rates that we're proposing starting in July 1st of 2024 at the beginning of fiscal year 25. So Jonathan Abenshine, Assistant Director of Utilities, will talk to you tonight about the electric utility and the cost of service analysis that is incorporated in this rate increase for electric. The gas utility proposal hasn't changed since, the 9% hasn't changed since January. The wastewater, when we spoke in January, the reserves were very low in the wastewater utility, and we went back and revised our staff proposal to be a 15% increase, or the $7.30 per month per residential customer. And then for the water utility, the increase is higher. That's because we increased our proposal for the distribution rate, and also the SFPUC, as Dean had mentioned, increased their rate proposal. Refuse is not expecting a rate increase still, and storm drain, it says 3%. The numbers in this table are rounded to the nearest percent, the nearest whole percent, and to the nearest 10 cents for the dollar figures to make it easier to see, because it's a lot of information. But the storm drain is pegged to the CPI, which is 2.6%. And when you see this series of rate increases, I just want to mention that if you look at Palo Alto's rate increases over the past 5 years, from 2020 through 2025, the average increase is 4.7% per year on average, which interest rates have been high in California and in the country, and in the utility industry, they've been even higher from 2020 through 2023, about 10 to 13%. So the rate increases for the utilities, just wanted to put that into perspective of the broader construction inflation. And with that, I wanted to turn to just a couple of slides from the wastewater utility to give you the highlights. So as I mentioned, the reserves are very low in the wastewater utility. This is due to several different factors. One of the things that happened additionally in the wastewater utility is moving forward more quickly than expected with the sewer main replacement 31 that Dean described. And we moved forward a year early, and that was important in order to coordinate with the repaving of El Camino. Additionally, our cost estimates came in higher than we forecasted and revenues lower. And so we went back and, as I said, changed our rate recommendation to a 15% increase. This will allow for a smaller sewer replacement in 2026 of $2 million for construction and $1 million for design in 25. And additionally, will allow us to move forward with the pump station retrofit in 2028. The alternative looks like what we brought to you in January of a 9% rate increase. But both of these alternatives would provide enough funding for the 5 mile per sewer main replacement going forward, starting in 2028. Sorry, 5 miles per project, and it's an every other year project. So it's 2.5 miles every year. Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think I said oh, yes.
One very brief question I had about this is that we had lower than projected revenue this year, and it wasn't exactly clear what revenue projections applied to these future years. Could you just clarify that point so that we're sure that
Yes.
there will be
So in
sufficient
the
funds?
current year, non-residential, commercial specifically revenue is declining about 4% instead of increasing the 9% that we increased rates. And that's because the commercial revenue is based upon winter usage, which was low due to the very extraordinarily wet winter. And possibly also because of business impacts due to COVID and recovery and drought. So what we did is we took it into account and assumed that that would come back over a 3-year period so we took a sort of 3-year period and assumed that that revenue would return. But the forecast then assumes a more normal winter usage going forward in each of the years. The residential and restaurant revenue is not lower than we projected. Yeah. And I also wanted to mention next that we did take this proposal to the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee members were supportive of the proposal. There's one additional item that isn't in the slide, but is in a later slide that I wanted to describe. Because the reserves are very low in this utility, and because we're doing a large main project, we want to make sure that there are sufficient funds for short-term needs. And so we explored the idea of doing a loan, and we're proposing up to a $3 million loan from the fiber utility to the wastewater collection utility. And that would be repaid in 2026 when the wastewater utility has sufficient funds to repay that. But it would be an ability to borrow those funds in the current year if they're needed. And that would be repaid at the city's portfolio rate, which is currently 2.47% plus 0.25% to 0.25%. So what the financial plan models for the documents we gave to you tonight is a 3% interest rate on a potentially up to $3 million loan. So that is the proposal that we're planning to bring to the council and that we would ask for any feedback on tonight.
Just to clarify that the loan would only be made if the cash were needed.
Yes, we would evaluate at the end of this fiscal year when we know what the reserves are and have the council authority through the approval process in order to make a loan up to that 3 million level, depending on how much is needed. And then it would be repaid.
So it's almost more like a line of credit. Is that right? Because it's only if you need it, do you draw on it? Or are you actually transferring the funds?
I am not sure of the distinction there, but it would be a loan and it would be, we just wouldn't, we often ask for council approval of transfers from either within a utility or across a utility, and then we only complete those transfers if they're needed. So this would be similar.
So I think the difference is we wouldn't wait until there's a situation that we need the money, but we would wait till the end of the year to see what shape the reserve is in before making a decision to borrow the $3 million or not. So it's not, don't borrow it until, oh my gosh, there's a problem, we need $3 million. It's, let's see how the rest of this year plays out, see what condition the reserve is in 6 months from now, and, or I guess less than 6 months from now. Is that correct? Is that what
So
we're
I
saying?
think I've become more confused on this than I was when we started. So is the authorization to borrow up to 3 million or to borrow 3 million? Up to 3 million, right? And so we wouldn't borrow to put money in reserves, I assume, because that seems silly.
Oh, we
You'd
would.
borrow if you need something? You'd borrow the whole 3 million, or would you borrow, say you suddenly find you're short like $500,000 and you don't want the reserves to go to zero. So do you then borrow $500,000 at that point, and then a year later or 6 months later, you borrow another $500,000 if you need it? Or is it or do you take the whole 3 million? I guess that's where I'm confused.
So what's happening right now is the sewer main replacement 31.
Yep.
So by the end of the year, we should have a good idea of the funds that are needed for that short term. Everything else should be covered by the revenues. So we should have, so it's when we get to the end of the year and we know the exact amount that we think we would need to borrow, that's when we would borrow up to the $3 million.
And it's going to be used pretty much for the sewer replacement. Is that the thought?
It's going to be to cover the needs for those funds in the short term.
But it's up to 3 million, and it's not a line of credit. You borrow the whole 3 million, or you borrow 2 million, or you borrow 1 million, depending on what you need.
Let me show you the recommendation slide if that would help. It's up
Sure.
to the 3 million.
Can I also ask, that was for the reserve fund to borrow up to 3 million. Is that in order to get the reserve back up to its minimum, or is that because money gets parked in the reserve fund before being paid out to Sewer Project 31?
So this is the recommendation language that would go to the council. So it says approving up to a 3 million enterprise transfer loan from fiber optics fund to the wastewater collection utilities operations reserve. Any funds that come into the wastewater utility go into the operations reserve. So it would be going into the operations reserve. And it would be used to cover the short-term needs of the utility. This utility is in a very kind of unique situation of having very low reserves. And so we just want to make sure that we have a plan in the event that additional funds are needed to make sure that we're properly paying for the costs of borrowing those funds. And I can talk about it a little bit more as we go through the slides to show you what the reserves look like.
And so it starts in the operations reserves, but it would then be moved to wherever it was needed, presumably CIP or something, right?
The spending also comes out of the operations reserve. Yeah, so it would be there to cover the costs.
What's the interest rate we charge on the transfer?
It's modeled as 3%. It's it would be at the city's portfolio rate, which is currently 2.47%, but is expected to be higher than that, plus 0.25%.
So it's like 5%. Oh,
So
0.25.
0.25,
0.25.
yeah. So it's like,
About 3.
we
Got it.
guessed about 3%.
So if I could just add, sorry, if I can just add one, it's really to manage the cash flow issue. So if cash flows, right now we're projecting cash flows not to go negative, but if they are going to go negative, that's when we would borrow to, and we could borrow in increments. We wouldn't have to make a decision of it's 3 million or 0. We could.
When you say the city's portfolio rate, that's what the city's currently receiving on its cash reserves?
That's my understanding from coordinating with,
They must be terrible at it. Right? It just must be. I mean, all of us can get 4 at least on our money.
Is this kind of in general? So there's a number of places in the future, and I don't want to have the same discussion every time. If it's the same process where particularly under the electric power plan, you're looking at borrowing from one reserve to another up to a certain amount. I had the kind of same kind of question. Would this be the same answer on all of them effectively? That, I mean, not the
No,
reason, but the fact that you're looking for this authorization at some future time, you'll say, what's the need? We'll borrow up to that, because I was kind of looking like, say, why don't we just authorize that amount?
Well, I think the thing is that when we start in the electric fund, we move reserves from one reserve to another reserve. So we're not actually asking to borrow money from the electric. So we don't take it out of one of the reserves, borrow it to the other reserve when it's in the same fund. In this case, we're actually asking for authorization because we're taking it from a total different fund. So if we decided that we wanted to take it out of the electric fund, we could have taken 3 million out of the electric, but we would have had to repay that fund. But interchangeable within the gas fund or the water fund, we just move those and we let you know that we're moving X to this new reserve.
But it's the same process. So there's no interest payment involved, but it's the same process where you would wait till the end of the year and then decide something up to, so for example, it says up to 20 million from electric special project reserve to supply operations reserve. You might take nothing, you might take 15, or you might take all
Right.
20.
Yeah, we wait till look at the end of the year and then see what we need to transfer at that point.
Great, thanks.
I have one more question. If the grant from Valley Water comes in or comes in higher, I don't know if we've heard from them, does that impact the need for the loan?
it could, that's one of the uncertainties. There could be some reimbursement, but at the same time, costs for the wastewater treatment could be higher than we expect. So there's a series of uncertainties that could make the costs and revenues higher or lower than our projections. So that's why there's some possibility that we need to protect against. And that's why we would be asking the UAC to recommend to the council, and then we would be asking the council for authorization to borrow only those funds that the wastewater utility needs to borrow up to the maximum of 3 million.
Have we heard from Valley Water? Or do we know when we'll hear from them?
I know they're working on it, but I don't know what the timeline is going to be. Are there other questions on this item?
I have a question. This is Rachel. I wasn't sure how many slides you're going to go through, but I had a question on something kind of related to what Commissioner Scharf was asking about. There are a couple places in the packet, page 42 and page 56, where we talk about unrealized losses on investments and loss on shared return on investment on cash. And I was curious what what would we be losing money on? And similarly, if you could just talk about what is our cash management process, and you mentioned something about interest rates being higher, and I'm wondering if our debt is all fixed rate, or if any of it flows.
Dave Yan, Utility Strategic Business Manager. Good evening, everyone. So for the unrealized gain and loss, I think it's just a paper accounting thing. So we have bought bonds throughout the years for years, like a laddering strategy. So if we buy at 2% and the market rate now is 5%, we take a loss of 3% in that unrealized gain and loss. If we borrow the 5% and now the interest rate's 2%, then we have a profit of that 3%. So it's just a fictitious number that goes up and down, assuming we liquidate everything at the current price. But our plan is always to hold the bonds till maturity. So it's really just a accounting number, if that helps. And regarding the 2% that Commissioner Scharf talks about, I think it's because it's blended over many years. Every year we invest so much money. So during the low interest rate years, we got really low bonds, low interest.
And any of our debt, is our debt all fixed rate? Like for all the bonds that we're paying debt service on in these?
As far as I know, they are, yes.
Okay.
But we can confirm that.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this before we go on? Okay. Okay, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the reserves and go into the details that we just touched on. This chart shows the green as the operations reserve, and you can see the concern in the end of 2023 with that reserve being at -0.7. So what happened in 2023 is the funds were not actually spent yet. That's what the orange stripy bar is. You can see that the funds were moved into the CIP reappropriations and commitments reserve. So what this chart shows, it models those funds being spent in 2024 and 2025. And the green bar, the operations reserve, you can see it recovering in 2024 significantly, and that's partly because the costs balance the revenues, but also because of this potential loan that's shown as coming into the operations reserve to really bring it up to that minimum guideline level and make sure that it brings the reserve up to a higher level. And then you can see the operations reserve doesn't really decline in 2026 when that loan is repaid in this model. And then the operations reserve continues to grow, and also the CIP reserve, we're able to begin to replenish that reserve over time and use that reserve to fund the larger main replacements that are coming up. I think there's a question.
So this chart actually says you will take the loan. As soon as you approve it, you take the 3 million, you put it in the operations reserve, and it sits there to show that we have money in the operations reserve.
That is what this shows.
Right.
Yes.
It doesn't show us needing the money. It shows us just having it sit there.
Yes. It shows it coming in 2024 and then being returned in 2026 with the interest.
Dean, maybe you could explain, why does the money, I mean, it may very well need, but why do we care if the operations reserve is low when you have the ability to borrow the money? Why would you borrow the money and put it into the reserve, pay 3% on it? I mean, I know it's paying to somebody else, right? But why would you do that? I mean, why would, from a cash management point, you do that? I mean, there may be a good reason. I just don't see it.
Well, I think the thing is that, well, we don't want the reserves to be at the negative level of all. But I think the bigger important thing is that when we are working on a project, as this is in 31, we won't know what those outlays will be by the end of the year period of time. And we're going to have to pay bills right then and there. By the time that we actually have to come back to you and then go back through finance and then go back through the council portions of it, then, we are going to be past that 30-day window period of whatever the cost might look like. So that's why we try to true it up at the end of the year to see where we're at. And then we just put this money in the bank, and we understand that, yes, there's a 3% rate on that money that we have borrowed, but it does sit in that reserve so that we do have those monies to be paying for these projects that we have. So it's mostly around a timing issue of when these projects finish. And, you know, we only get really one chance really to make some changes unless we do it in kind of in a mid-year timeframe. We could do it then, but it's too late then, depending on whatever the project is, timeline is, scheduling wise.
I think maybe what some of us are expressing is it just feels odd to borrow money from the fiber fund. What would we do if we didn't have a big pot of cash sitting over there in the fiber fund available for loaning out?
I think at that point, we would determine then we'd have to look at the other funds in the other utilities. So if we move forward with the whole fiber and we spend all those dollar amounts, you know, there are other funds and other reserves in other utilities that we would then take the borrow from. It could be from the gas fund, or it could be from the water fund, or.
And just to push the hypothetical a little bit farther, what if we didn't have 5 utilities? It just, there's a sense of sort of like,
so we were
it's
only.
a diversified portfolio of utilities that can slosh funds from one to the other. What would we do if it was just wastewater?
We'd have, if we were only a wastewater only, we'd have to go out and actually get a loan. We would have to actually put the money back out, or, you know, we would have to do some bond financing or something to actually come up with the monies that we were going to be short for whatever the project was for. And then pay market rate.
Right. I guess there's a feeling that it's, I'm just going to use the word odd, that the reserves, the mental model of what a reserve is meant to be, sort of breaks down. And if we in fact are sort of free to move monies about between the utilities, should each of them have their own reserve, or should it just be a large pot of money that's available? And I think we're probably not allowed to do that, but.
Yeah, this was changed some time ago. Dave, do you remember when? Do you remember when we went away from having one big bucket of reserves, and then we had this, what it was an auditor's? Okay, so somewhere around 2009, we did have, prior to that, we just had one bucket, one large bucket of reserves. And then the auditor came through and said, you have way too much money in one reserve. We could have moved it anywhere we wanted to. We could have done anything with it. And so the outcome of that audit was that we needed to actually break it out by the fund, because that's how the utility was broken out into those 5 utilities. And so that's why we have so many different reserves in each of the funds, so that the money is shown and it's calculated and it can be tracked directly to whatever fund that we have a reserve in. Otherwise, it would have been much easier if we were able to have one super fund reserve.
I guess another way of expressing it, I guess, is has the wastewater fund been managed in such a way, like, should we have raised rates more a year ago, 2 years ago, to have avoided the situation if we didn't have the sort of cushion of other utility funds to draw from?
Probably even further back than that. And the reason for it is that, you know, we have not raised the rates compared to how we have seen the inflation on just cost of construction. So we've always kept it at the low. It's the lowest fund that we have, that we keep just basically the minimum amount, because that's what we get in from a minimum amount from revenues. And so there's not a lot of extra that comes in because we've kept our rates so low over the years. And correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, but I also think that now with the treatment plant, we have to look at what those costs are going to be. over the timeline, I was just doing some envelope costing, over the entire period of that, overall, it's about a 31% that we are going to be, have to fund, 30% of the whole entire project. It's about $245 million. That's about $76 million overall, over the expand of the time with that. So we have to think about, so that we don't get in these type of situations where we're borrowing money from other funds and then have to pay this back. This is the reason why we're looking at trying to true up some of these dollars and some of the rate increases that we'll have to deal with. Because if the plant was running smoothly like it did years ago, no more upgrades, then, we were probably in pretty good shape. But I think that now those upgrades need to be done at the plant, and that's also included in these costs and the revenues. Is that about correct, ladies? Yeah.
Can you just remind us what's the minimum reserve and what's the maximum for wastewater?
Thanks for bringing that question up. The operations reserve is shown on this slide, and it shows a different view of that red line. So the target is 105 days of treatment and operating expenses. And then there's a band above and below that, I think, of 45 days of expenses. So you can see that the minimum in 2025 is a little bit like about $3.5 million. So what we're trying to do is cover the costs and then rebuild the reserves and make sure that we're paying for the costs associated with the utility without doing any mixing of costs across utilities like you were pointing out.
And are there any consequences like with city bond ratings or the interest we have to pay on bonds if we're below our reserve targets or at or below risk assessments? I guess what I'm asking is we have this risk assessment number, we have a reserve minimum, maximum, and target. And I appreciate it's based on so many days of operations expenses, but are there consequences besides we want to have that cash? Is there anything beyond smart money management?
I think if it's a one time, I don't think they'll count against us. But if it's perpetual, then yes, it would hurt our ratings. But I think if we also bond with other utilities, like the electric fund, depending on the project, then we would get the higher rating. So sometimes when we do bonding, we try to bond with multiple utilities at once to get the higher rate.
Chair Siegel, I'm over here. I might suggest that at some future date, you bring in a guest speaker called Colleen Nose, who's our assistant city manager, and she's managed this, for a lot of years and can give the facts as well as the alternatives that she's looked at. And I'm sure she'd be happy to come.
Can you just clarify what risk assessment is?
Yes, the risk assessment is the possibility of some event happening, like revenues being 10% lower than we thought, or treatment costs being 10% higher than we thought. So it's a utility-specific risk assessment for utility-specific risks like that in this utility. Yeah. And I just wanted to add that, this is a Prop 218 utility, and the customers need to pay the costs associated with the utility. So we want to make sure we're not in a situation where there's any negative cash, so that we're not borrowing, since the cash is shared across city funds. We don't want to be borrowing essentially from another fund. We want to protect against that and make sure that we're borrowing the money up front with council approval and then paying those borrowing costs so that the Prop 218 requirements are met.
I guess that makes sense to me, except we've been undercharging is what this tells us. So
Okay.
Prop 218, I mean, you could argue goes both ways. You can't overcharge, but you also should not be undercharging. So, I mean, I guess you're hearing pretty loud and clear that, we all have concerns about the way the fund was managed and the idea that we have to borrow money and pay 3% on $3 million is suboptimal, so I say.
Thanks for that statement. I'm not sure that Prop 218 says you can't undercharge. Prop 218 is up to, you can't.
Yeah, fair enough. We don't have to get into a 218 discussion. But, and I guess I also want to throw it, I'm very appreciative that you're meeting with the finance committee and they were open and to increasing rates by a double-digit amount. I know that's been a reluctance sometimes in the past. And, this is maybe the back end of what happens when we have these, I'm going to call them political decisions about rates rather than practical financial decisions about rates. I think this is the back end, and hopefully it gets back to city council that they can see the other side of it.
I can comment on that just briefly. I'm on the finance committee as well. And one of the finance committee members said, we probably in hindsight shouldn't have kept them so low. I don't recall exactly which utility he was talking about, but the tone was, we tried to react to the pandemic and the outrageous bills that people had from the gas. And that probably wasn't the most prudent thing to do. And so there was general agreement, as Dean said, on support of what you have here. At the same time, I was going to mention this later, but at the same time, there's obvious, already there's feedback from residents who read newspapers and all that and say, oh, now all these rates are going up. We don't want any increases. Well, that's not your problem. You got to do what's right for the city, staff, and council has to figure out the way to correctly message that the amount of investments that we have to do and the price of getting the goods to resell to them is going up as well. So.
Thanks for that. Commissioner Croft, I see your hand raised.
Oh, yeah, I just had a question about, we're borrowing from the fiber fund and we have to pay interest. I'm assuming that interest goes to the fiber fund. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's still within it's still within Palo Alto. It's just in our accounts and possibly even earning more than the rate we're paying the fiber fund, I'm assuming. So maybe it's a little bit of a loss for the fiber fund.
I think the loss on that one would actually be to the wastewater fund, because the fiber fund would get the 2.47% generally if it wasn't borrowed to the wastewater fund. So to make up for that, they put another 0.25 on top as general past practice, is what I heard.
So can we move forward with this recommendation?
Yes.
I move to.
Well, wait. Let's just make sure there's no more discussion before we actually move.
I was going to turn to this slide and I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions.
Any other questions? Okay, so now.
So the staff recommendation, the recommendation is, make sure you can see it, is for the UAC to recommend that the city council adopt a resolution approving three things: the fiscal year 25 wastewater collection financial plan, the changes to the rate schedules, including these rate changes, and then the 3 million enterprise transfer loan from the fiber fund to the wastewater collection utility fund.
I move
To
I'll
adopt
second.
the resolution.
to adopt this resolution.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we'll go first online. Commissioner Croft,
I approve it.
Commissioner.
I approve as well.
Approve.
Aye.
Yes.
Approve.
And I approve as well. So thank you for that and for answering our questions. And we can move on to item 4, which is the electric utility financial plan. Are there any comments from the public?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 4, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. And is that, okay, Jonathan?
Good evening, commissioners. Let me get my screen shared here. I really apologize for not being able to join you folks in person. I didn't want to get you all sick. So appreciate your understanding. Tonight, I'm going to present to you the financial plan and rate changes for the electric fund. This is, there's some not insignificant changes from what you saw in the preliminary forecasts. And we're going to end up talking about the results of a cost of service study that we wrapped up after the preliminaries that we brought to you. So I'm going to try to go through these slides as quickly as I can, but there's a lot to explain. There we go. Okay. So in January, we were estimating a 5% electric rate increase for this year. But over the last year, we completed a cost of service study to ensure each customer class was being charged the fair and equitable rate that reflected the cost to serve that customer class. And the study is showing the need for significant changes to the rates for different customer classes. That's due to changes in consumption and significant shifts in our cost structure since our previous cost of service study. Commercial customer classes and residential and large residential users are expected to see decreases, while small residential users are expected to see increases. And I'll talk more about the cost of service study and results a little bit later in the presentation. But because of these results, we ended up changing our plan. Instead of doing a set of rate changes to increase revenue by 5%, as we planned last year, and as we indicated we do in January, we're instead recommending holding revenue nearly the same as last year. And that'll allow us to make the cost of service study changes without increasing rates excessively for any given customer. The median residential customer is expected to see a 9% increase. That's about a $6.97 a month increase. And I just want to note that I made a small correction in the slides. We had to do a small service adjustment as we were preparing for finance. And I wanted to just reflect that to you folks here. Smaller customers may see higher percentage increases, but no more than an $11 per month increase, and that's only for a very narrow range of customers. We're exploring ways to use the rate assistance program in case there are any low-income customers who have trouble absorbing the increase. Now, over the longer term, the major drivers of rate increases include recovering from the effects of drought and low reserves stemming from holding rates low through the pandemic, but and we were expecting it would take a little time to recover from those when we did our forecast last year. But we're actually looking to be in a little bit of a better position this year with our reserves than we projected in last year's forecasts. We're expecting lower supply costs this year because of higher hydroelectric generation from the wet 2022-2023 winter. and substantially higher revenues from electric supply portfolio sales of various types in the current fiscal year and next fiscal year. And that's allowing us to replenish our reserves, which again is what allows us to hold revenues flat this year to absorb the cost of service changes. But these are short-term benefits that aren't expected to continue in the long term. We're expecting over the longer term rates are going to rise due to rising supply costs and capital expenditures and debt service related to grid modernization and other investments. That's a 5% rate increase per year we're projecting going forward. But I will say that the forecasts for FY 2026 and FY 2029 are very uncertain. I think more uncertain than we usually experience, because there are a lot of conflicting trends that could change these projections. If we see significantly increasing loads related to data centers and electrification that are not offset by other declining loads, that could reduce this forecast. Increasing costs related to electrification or electric supply costs could change it in the other direction. So there's a lot of uncertainty here. I won't speak to this, but I'm happy to answer questions. We talked about this during the preliminary forecast, our cost structure. And we also talked a little bit about the drivers of, or the cost trends over the next few years. And that has changed a little bit from the preliminaries. And a lot of it is really related to the timing of certain capital investments. And so one thing I just want to note about this chart is that FY 2025 is, because of the timing of various capital investments, expected to have unusually low costs. This is due to a combination of those one-time revenues I was talking about, but even greater, it's related to the timing of capital investments that are coming in FY 2024, and then the debt being issued for those capital investments in FY 2025. And the combination of these factors is making FY 2025 revenue look really low. So these annualized increases that you're looking at here for the FY 20 to 25 period and the FY 25 to 29 period, those are a little bit skewed. The more accurate thing to look at is the annualized increase for the entire period, FY 2020 to FY 2029, all the way on the right of the chart. And that's showing increases from supply and distribution cost increases ranging from 3% to 5% per year. That's, not favorable compared to consumer inflation, but it's very favorable compared to the rate of energy inflation in the West over the last few years, which is, we're seeing some metrics ranging from 7 to 12% per year. And, the drivers of these cost increases are what we've been talking about what I talked about earlier. Increasing transmission costs, other increasing supply costs, grid modernization costs, and construction inflation and other types of inflation. Now, in the interest of time, so I have a few slides on these cost drivers. I'm not going to talk through each of them. I'm happy to answer questions on all of these. If people would like me to return to any of these slides, I'm happy to. But, they have changed a little bit since the preliminary, but the drivers are very similar to what we talked about during the preliminaries. This is our standard revenue and cost chart showing historical rate changes and then projected rate changes. In this chart, you can see the stacked columns representing our costs, and then the blue line across the top, which is our revenue. And
I don't think we have that slide up.
Oh, I am so sorry. I didn't advance through these slides. So these are the cost driver slides. And yes, here's the chart. And right, so you can see the stacked bars showing our costs, and then the revenue lines across the top. And the blue line represents the revenues from our base rates, and the red line is with the hydro rate adjuster revenues added in. You can see in FY 2021 and FY 2022, revenue costs were above revenues, bringing down reserves. In FY 2023, it looks like revenues were significantly higher than costs. But that was when we received that $24 million judgment in our successful litigation against the federal government related to our federal hydropower. And so, but if you separate that out, revenues actually were a little bit below costs. In FY 2024, you can see our forecast shows costs higher than revenues. Those total costs in FY 2024 and FY 2025, again, this is what I was talking about the timing of certain major capital investments in FY 2024, and then the issuance of debt service in FY 2025 to fund those. And specifically, we approved budgets for the Hanover substation rebuild and the first round of grid modernization in FY 2024. And we'll need to fund that from reserves in FY 2024, but then in FY 2025, we'll issue the debt, which will allow us to cover an equivalent amount of costs and restore our reserves. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the cost of service study that is driving this range of rate changes that you see here from -6% to 9% in FY 2025. And I'll just remind everybody that the revenue changes, it's pretty much nothing. It's a 0.5% increase resulting from these rate changes.
Jonathan, thank you.
Yeah, so the cost of service study methodology, cost of service analysis, this is a study that utilities do, and it's based on, an evolved 100-year-old methodologies that have evolved over 100 years on how to set rates equitably. And these cost of service analyses are meant to, they're meant to help utilities set rates and make sure that they're aligning the costs, the charges with the cost to serve each customer group. These studies have taken on an even more significant role with the passage of Prop 26 in 2010 that amended the state constitution. And I'll talk about that in a few slides, in another slide here. But the basic methodology for these studies is that you first establish how much revenue you need to keep yourself financially solvent. And then you use the consumption patterns. You look at the consumption patterns of, you look at how each customer class is using energy. And you use those consumption patterns to allocate costs, different types of costs among customer classes. And you can see the City of Palo Alto customer classes listed here. And the kinds of allocators that are used are things like the number of kilowatt hours used, the peak demand, and the number of customers in the class. And then once you've allocated costs among groups of customers, you then design rates that allocate costs to customers who consume in different ways. People who consume, they're within any given customer class, within the E1 residential customer class, there will be people who consume heavily in the winter versus heavily in the summer. There'll be people who consume heavily on peak versus off peak, and so you try and design rates that best capture those costs. And examples of the types of rates you can design are tiered rates, seasonal rates, time of use rates. You can use fixed charges and other sorts of varieties of rate designs. I mentioned that this study these studies have taken on more importance because of Prop 26. That was a 2010 state ballot initiative that amended the state constitution. It was focused on user fees, and but it also noted at the very end of the initiative that gas and electric, it also applied to gas and electric rates. And it essentially says that gas and electric rates must represent the cost of service absent voter and ratepayer approval. And what that means, some of the implications of this is that you can't, in utilities, sometimes we've tried to design rates that produce certain results. We might have social or policy or environmental goals. And the implication of this is that you can't really do incentive rates unless they're also cost-based. You can't really use rates to drive policy. Although, where there is, maybe a judgment call about how to design rates, you can try to make it consistent with policy. Optional rates also have to be cost-based. It's hard to do transitions. If you have a steep shift in rates, you can't really break it out over several years because the adopted cost of service study represents the most accurate and cost-based rate structure. And agencies have gotten in trouble in California when policymakers modify cost of service analyses from the dais because it undermines the cost of service justification. And that can be really deeply frustrating to policymakers because people feel like they're being handcuffed. And that's why we've come to this body generally before we do a cost of service analysis and we'll get policy guidelines from the commission and the council to make sure that we're doing the cost service analysis in line with their policy goals.
Jonathan,
I
can
will
I ask
say-
a question? If we wanted to, as a city,
Yep.
change rates to incentivize the values of the city, what % of voters would have to approve it?
I would have to get back to you on that one. I think it depends on how the initiative was formulated. I'm unsure when it would be a 2/3 threshold and when it would be a 50% threshold.
Jonathan, I had another question. This is Megan. On these cost of service studies, how many years do they cover or average over?
We usually do them every 3 to 7 years.
Okay, and then there are certainly marginal costs associated with large new loads coming on. How are those accounted for in these cost of service studies? Like, for instance, if a data center comes online, this is hypothetical, but
Sure.
Some large new load comes online and, for instance, residents have invested in, hydropower over a long period of time, but the marginal new load is more expensive, plus you need more transmission, et cetera. So while the overall rates go up, like the entities responsible for those rates increasing may not be those initial.
Yeah.
Right, you get the point. It's the
Yeah.
marginal cost allocation.
Yeah, we don't treat new customers, we don't analyze the marginal impact of new customers and charge them custom rates based on their marginal impact. They pay what other customers pay, and sometimes that can be a benefit to them, sometimes that can be a negative. Sometimes the marginal cost associated with a customer is greater than the current average cost. Sometimes it's actually lower than the current average cost. So sometimes the community benefits, usually the community benefits from the addition of new loads like that, though.
Okay.
Because there's the opportunity to use existing capacity more efficiently than in Palo Alto in particular, more efficiently than we have in the past.
Understood, but what you're saying is that it certainly wouldn't do that for an individual entity, but
Right.
Across these costs of service studies, you also are not doing that.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Sorry, across these different sort of classes, it's okay. I think I understand what you're saying.
I'm happy to, yeah, I'm sorry that hopefully I was able to answer your question. And if I haven't, feel free to contact me offline or to keep asking the question. I'd like to make sure I get you the right answer.
Can I ask a question? This is Rachel out in Zoom land. Does the cost of service assessment, I'm curious, and this is I'm curious, does it take into consideration hourly? So as there's eventually a move to hourly matching, right? And for example, you mentioned like time of use or peak demand. Like, does it take into consideration that energy during, the massive 4 to 9, for example, might not only cost more, but you have to offset, that whatever gas we might be purchasing on the open market, or gas-fired electricity, whatever, gas-generated electricity. Does it consider that is more expensive energy at that time than energy at a different time of day?
Yes, if there's hourly data available. So as we start to roll out smart meters, we'll be able to take those factors into account in the cost of service study more than we do now. But even now, the cost of service study does take into account more often through estimates, the impact of different customer classes' usage patterns on costs associated with, say, their peak demands during certain times of day. It just doesn't do it on the level with the level of precision that we're going to be able to do after we get smart meters.
So I guess my impression is it's a little disappointing to see, for example, like higher tier, the differential between low tier and high tier, the price differential being very small. So it doesn't incentivize people to use less. It's not a very strong incentive, unfortunately. And then I guess another question would be, will we do another one of these shortly after AMI is fully in effect?
Yeah, I think realistically, we're going to have to update this study next year and the year after. And whether we do a wholesale, overhaul of the study using using updated data, I don't know. But we will need to, as we start transitioning towards time of use with the smart meter rollout, we're going to have to update the study.
Sorry, one more question on this. They did mention they were evaluating the rate design options available, and I don't believe we've seen anything more than just this one proposal. Were there other options available that they analyzed that just were not included in the report?
So I think what's trying to be represented there is that we look at different approaches and evaluate whether those approaches meet cost of service. And the approach that we're reflecting here is the one that most reflects cost of service. We didn't have a set of multiple cost of service policy options that we could have decided between that we're not presenting to you. There's only one.
Okay, yeah, that's what it sounded like. That there were a couple options and we had to choose one.
No, that wasn't it. Sorry for that. Be clear with that. I expect there will be more questions on this. Let me finish giving the overview here. I will just share that you might find other publicly owned utilities who have different interpretations of what Prop 26 does and doesn't mean. I do think our attorneys have a real track record of being right with their interpretations. Also, you may see CCAs. CCAs, I think their determinations, they don't believe Prop 26 applies to them. I don't know if that's been tested or not. And I'll also just note that CCAs don't have full control over their rates like we do. They only control part of the commodity rate for PG&E customers. So if you're looking to see what other utilities do, you may see them doing things differently from what we do. And there are reasons for that. That we may not be able to imitate everything that other utilities do. I mentioned policy guidelines. These are the policy guidelines that this commission adopted back in 2021. And they focused on, being being conscious of low income and designing the rates, being conscious of the impact on building and vehicle electrification, and solar and storage, and making sure we think about where we're headed long-term toward time of use rates as we do our design, and also acknowledging the need for a fixed or minimum monthly charge. Palo Alto is probably the only utility in California at this point without a fixed charge, and it really is a necessity from a cost of service standpoint. Key results from this cost of service analysis. We're not doing time of use rates right now. I think that's likely coming in July 1st, 2026, although we're going to be talking in the next few months about whether earlier, there are alternatives to introduce them earlier. We did change the time periods for the time of use rates we do have for medium and large commercial. I think we only have one customer on those rates at the moment, but that'll change as we shift to more expansive use of smart meters. And I apologize here. This still reflects that 8% increase. It's actually a 9% on the median residential bill. And there are three factors driving this. One, the residential class as a whole needs an increase in revenue to meet cost of service, while the commercial classes need decreases. And this is due to changing consumption patterns and also changes in our cost structures. And then within the residential class, the median residential and lower, they're seeing increases because that fixed charge, when you add it in, it impacts the lower users more than it impacts the higher users. And then there is a flattening of the tiers due to changes in residential consumption. And that fixed charge, so that's replacing a minimum charge, which was very difficult to implement. We never really were able to get that working in our billing system. So switching to a fixed charge is going to work better for us. And while this is a little bit of a painful shift this year, one side benefit of making these shifts right now is that it actually moves us closer to where we're going to need to go with time of use rates. The time of use rate is essentially a uniform rate with no tiers, and but with changing rates according to the time of day. And shifting to that sort of a rate from a steeply tiered system in 1 year would be a lot more significant of a shift for residents, for low using residents than this shift. So this kind of allows for effectively, it's cost of service, but effectively allows for a little bit of a transition. I will say though that our rates still beat PG&E by quite a lot, even for low users. I'll get into the bill impacts here now. I just want to acknowledge there are some high percentage increases for lower users, but the dollar amount increase for lower users is on the order of, for that 300, it's on the order of anywhere from, it's $4 to $8 per month or so for most users. There is a narrow band there, right around 300 kilowatt hours a month, where it goes up to $10. In practice, I don't think a lot of people are going to be seeing that level of impact. This shows graphically the residential bill changes by usage level. So these are a few different sample usage levels: 200 kilowatt hours per month, 300 kilowatt hours per month, the median bill, and then higher users. And what you also have here on the right side is the percentage of users in Palo Alto who are in different usage ranges. So you can see that, as you'd expect, close to 50% of our users are below that 330 kilowatt hour. So let me go back and describe this slide. The folks mentioned it in advance. This is, again, where you're seeing that range of residential bill changes graphically by usage level, and then you have the pie chart over here that shows the percentage of customers who are in each usage level. And about half are lower users in the either below 200 kilowatt hours a month or in the 200 to 300 or in the 30 kilowatt hour range. And then the remaining 50% are above 330 kilowatt hours. I mentioned that in our COSA report, we did an analysis of actual bill data. And that shows, because people's usage varies significantly from month to month. And so we took actual usage data and applied the rate changes. And I have that chart from the COSA report extracted. It shows lower actual bill increases. And I have that in the backup slides if people want to take a look. As far as competitiveness goes, I don't know why this still says current gas bill comparisons. That was supposed to be fixed. But essentially for last year, the median residential bill was about 40% below PG&E's. Now with the large rate increases, that's 50 to 60% below. And even with the rate increases, every user, excuse me, low users, medium users, and high users are seeing really significant discounts compared to PG&E. Excuse me. So let me just move through the reserve charts really quickly here, and then we can go back to questions. So first off, the plan keeps supply reserves within guideline levels. And the plan, because of those large capital investments in FY24, the plan does require borrowing from the Electric Special Projects Reserve, but that gets repaid in FY25, along with other outstanding internal loans from the Electric Special Projects Reserve that we had once the debt service is issued. The plan also replenishes the hydro stabilization reserve to 17.4 million, which is close to the target level of 19 million. And that puts us in a pretty good position to get through future dry years. I will note that this chart shows us accumulating cap and trade funds. In reality, we're expecting to use those funds on local decarbonization. We just don't have the spending plans approved yet. So the financial plan shows accumulation. I don't expect that to happen. With the hydroelectric stabilization reserve replenished, our reserves will exceed our supply cost risks, which is good. And the distribution operations reserve is currently negative, in part because of some large capital investments in FY 2023. But this plan gets it back into the guideline levels in FY 2025 and forward. And over the long term, we're also able to fund the CIP reserve as well. Again, this chart shows us accumulating public benefits funds. Just like cap and trade, we expect to spend this down through local decarbonization programs. And this is the staff recommendation. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you very much. I was reading, so looking at one is the EES Consulting, the cost of service report kind of came up with a minus 2.2% decrease in revenue is what they thought was appropriate. We kind of went away and came back with a 0.5% increase in revenue. So my first question is, how do we square that circle? Where did that wiggle room come from and how did we achieve it? And maybe kind of tied up with that question, when I look at the EES Consulting packet, page 132, the recommended rates there and the current and proposed rates that are packet page 271, they seem identical to me, except for the residential E1, which is 22 cents per kilowatt hour, in the recommendation and then, I'm sorry, in the report, and then 20 cents per kilowatt hour in the packet, or what's, we're presumably want to be recommended to council. So I guess my question is that how does this all square that they recommended something that did minus 2.2%? We're saying it's 0.5% up, and there's only, as far as I can see, one minor change in the rates. And why did you make that change in the rates?
So I'll answer your first question first, and then I'm going to ask you to refer me again to the page in the packet for your second question. But let me answer the first question first. So this cost of service study has a more sophisticated backcast than we use with our financial planning models. So our financial planning model revenues for FY 2025 match the revenue requirement from the cost of service study, but the previous year revenues, for the current rates, they have a different estimate than we do. And so they show a 2% decrease while we show a 0.5% increase. And that's the reason for the difference in those two. The revenue requirement is identical between the financial plan and the cost of service study. And I can show you where to find that in both documents.
Okay, that part makes sense to me. So what I was referring to is the cost of service and rate study. It's page 7 on that study, which is page 132 in the packet.
Thank you.
And it's packet page 271, which is page 12 in the utility financial plan. And again, the rates appear identical to me, except for that one rate. They are identical except for one rate.
Yeah, which rate is not identical? They should all be identical. So I want to.
Tier 2 energy for residential E1. It's 22 cents per kilowatt hour in the cost of service and 20 cents per kilowatt hour in the proposed rates.
Okay, I'm gonna have to double check all those. And I might ask folks on the rates team who are here to take a look at the financial plan, staff report, and E1 rate sheet just to see which are matching and which ones aren't matching. We did proof all those, but we must have missed something. What's in the cost of service study is the right number.
Okay, so it's the idea is adopting the rates that are in the cost of service study.
Right.
That would be the resolution, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we'll be able to check those live here.
Thank you.
I had one question on the, first of all, I hope you're feeling better, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I had one question on part B of this, which I guess is related to the questions that a lot of commissioners had on wastewater, which is, could you explain the transfers? There's transfers from supply to distribution, from one sort of thing from operations to capital.
Sure.
It just seems very confusing and sort of hard. It seems hard to understand, hard to manage with those transfers among incommensurate kind of parts of the business.
Yeah, and this is something we don't want to be doing long term. The cost of service analysis will help get the rates aligned with the projected costs for each year. But we do have this cash flow issue related to the timing of the debt issuance for these major capital investments in FY 2024. A good place to look is page 6 of the staff report. I feel like my packet page numbering is different from the commissioners, so I don't want to say the packet page. But page 6 of the page 6 of the staff report shows the different reserves and all the different changes that are happening. And essentially what's going on in FY 2024 is we're taking a loan from the electric special projects reserve. We're transferring money from the supply operations reserve to the distribution operations reserve, because that's where all those capital investments are. Then once the debt service is issued, and once reserves are replenished, the distribution operations reserve will repay the supply operations reserve, and then the supply operations reserve will repay the electric special projects reserve.
Okay.
You just have to do that from an accounting point of view.
Yeah, rather than, dwell on it as part of this review of this plan, could we just agree, since you've agreed that it's not the greatest business practice, could we agree to review how to improve it at a future meeting?
I'm open to that, but I think that the actions that we're asking you to take tonight will address it. I think you'll notice that you don't see these transfers from distribution or supply operations. You don't see these interfund transfers happening beyond FY 2025 because we believe we've taken the actions we need to prevent that from happening in the future.
Right. I'm trying to find a way not to derail the, approval of the review of the financial plans. But I think we do need to address the basic practice. It's not the details, but it's the practice of shifting money from two different, pretty much unrelated parts of the business.
If the commission wanted to have that discussion, I think we'd be open to it. I also just reiterate, I think we're addressing that issue for the electric utility tonight.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I had one other question, which is partly related. It isn't in your slides, but in the financial plan, figure 6 in the financial plan, which was page 26 of the electric utility financial plan. I was a little surprised that it says the electricity consumption is decreasing, has been for quite a while, and is forecast to continue to decrease for the next 5 years or 5-6 years, I guess, in the plan. At the same time, we're increasing the capacity of distribution grid, so by quite a bit, at least on the residential side. So it seems like, won't that be increasing, or won't the average load factor decrease, thereby increasing rates in doing that? And if that's correct.
Yes, if this forecast.
What are we doing about it?
Well, I'll address the first part of your question first, and then I'd like to clarify what you're looking for with respect to what we're doing about it. But we've seen long-term declines in electricity consumption, I think in part related to efficiency and rooftop solar, but also heavily related to the changing consumption, the changing character of of large commercial uses in Palo Alto. Industrial uses have moved out, and it's more Class A office, and that's continued. It's been historical, and it is continuing right now. That could be offset, as I was mentioning earlier in the presentation, by potential new data center load. And also by electrification as well. It depends on the pace of electrification. It depends on the scale. And we use a forecast that we update every single year. We don't want to assume that large growth in consumption in our financial plans, because it could potentially lead us to make financial decisions that put the utility at risk. But each year we update our financial plans, and as we start to see new loads come on, and as we see electrification increase, we'll start to wrap those into the forecast. And that's one of the factors I talked about earlier that might bring those 5% out in the future down. Of course, there are other factors that might drive them up as well related to costs. Now, I think you had a question about what are we doing about these changes, and I guess I'm wondering what your there are a lot of ways to answer that question. I want to make sure I answer it the way that's going to be most useful to you.
Right. I guess I was partly surprised that the loads were decreasing and forecast to continue to decrease. But then also, especially we've been talking about a big, of course, capital build on the distribution grid. And so it seems like that would just make the decreasing load factor worse. And it feels like,
well, I
guess disconnect between the decreasing load and the big capital investment in growing the grid.
Yeah, let me address the disconnect between the different forecasts. We use different scenarios for different purposes. When we're planning for the grid or we're doing supply planning, we're having to plan for scenarios where we're trying to have to work out plans for how we would deal with load growth, how we would buy electric supply to deal with that load growth, or how we would increase capacity on the grid to address building electrification, since that is a community goal.
Right.
But we need to have a different forecast when we're setting the rates, because when we use those higher load forecasts for grid planning or supply planning, they're conservative forecasts. We're managing risk by using those higher forecasts. But if we were to use a higher forecast for financial planning, we would be increasing our risks. It would not be a conservative forecast, and we would be potentially putting the utility in a bad financial position. So we need to be looking at multiple different scenarios, and we need to have ideas about how we're going to deal with multiple potential load scenarios over the next 10 years. In the case of the financial plans, we have the prediction that we have right now. If we see increasing loads, then we're going to take those into account as they start to as we start to see them coming onto the system, and that's the financially prudent way to deal.
Okay, so there's intent at some point to kind of connect the supply and demand scenarios together.
They will connect over time, as again, the future reality is very uncertain. So as that reality becomes more certain, those forecasts will converge.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Croft?
Thank you. Yeah, I was curious. I had heard before that we had the time of use rates in commercial, but I didn't realize that for E4 and E7, we had both time of use and not time of use. So I'm curious how many, kind of what percentage of our customers in each of those tiers choose the time of use? And do we have analysis of what that does to usage and the cost for them? And I was kind of wondering, why do we offer them a choice?
We have one customer on time of use, and that time of use rates have been around since before I was doing the rates. I don't have the history on why they were adopted, but we're heading in that direction for all of our customers. And so there hasn't been a reason to remove them for those customers, and for that customer who is on the rate schedule, it's the appropriate rate schedule for them.
And with time of use, do you anticipate it will be mandatory time of use once we move to time of use, or will we also have a choice like these guys do?
I think that's probably a discussion for the next cost of service study, unfortunately.
Okay.
We're still working that out.
Quick question about the E2G and E4G rates that are at the bottom of the recommendation slide that you have up. Looking at them in the redlined portion of the report, I noticed that a bunch of language about the maximum demand meter had been crossed out. I'm just curious, what is the thinking behind removing that language?
So it wasn't necessary for E2 because E2 doesn't have demand metering.
Say that again?
It wasn't necessary for E2 as of right now because E2 doesn't have demand metering.
E2G, for what it's worth.
Neither of them, neither E2 nor E2G have demand metering.
They don't have demand metering. I see. So even though we've spelled out demand charges and we've got language about if energy use has exceeded 800 kilowatt hours, we don't do our own, what we say we're going to do in our rate schedule.
So E2 doesn't have demand. So E2 and E2G don't. Neither E2 nor E2G have demand charges. But if a customer is over 8,000 kilowatt hours per month regularly, then they get shifted to E4 or E4G, both of which have demand charges and demand metering. But E2 and E2G don't have demand charges or demand metering, unless there's an error in the rate schedules.
Okay. So that's, I see. So what happens on E2G is when it has been, when usage has exceeded 8,000 kilowatt hours, the demand meter is installed and then their rate plan is switched to an E4
Exactly.
plan. Okay. And so then my question on E4, sorry, I have to flip through a lot of pages.
Yeah, it's a big.
That was the only place where that language was struck. I see. Okay. That explains it. Thank you.
I actually have an answer to the previous question about what happened with the tier 2 rate. It looks like the rate sheet is correct, but the financial plan and the staff report have the wrong tier 2 number in them. So we'll correct that for finance committee. But what you're being asked to approve for the cost of service study and the rate sheets, that's accurate.
So it's the rate sheets that are in the cost of service study that we would be approving.
Yes. Yeah. And the financial plan does have that error in it. And if the commission's okay with it, we'll just take that as a cleanup item. We'll clean that up in finance as well.
So that's a 22 cents one, just so that we're
Yes.
on the same, okay.
Yeah, the tier 2 rate for the E1 customer class.
I had a question, Jonathan. It's a little nit, but we're reducing the NEM 1 and 2 payment rate. And on it's page 13 of something in packet page 272, there's this comment that says the reason it's going down is based on updated avoided cost calculations reflecting declines in long-term energy market prices expected to continue into the future. And everywhere else in the report, it talks about increases in electricity market prices. And so I wasn't sure what that meant.
So a lot of the increases are related to transmission, and we update those, and they're longer term forecasts. Those net energy metering rates, they're changing each year, and we had real spikes, I think, in on-peak electricity that really made that, or I'm sorry, not on peak anymore, but we had real spikes in midday electricity, and I think some things related to generating capacity that really impacted those net energy metering rates in previous years, but those sort of unusual market conditions have relieved, and that's what's driving the reduction in the NEM rates. That is also reflected if you look back to FY 2023 electric supply costs. You're going to see really significantly higher electric supply costs than you see in FY 24 and 25, and that's some of the market moves that reduced those supply costs for FY 24 and 25 are the same things that are reducing the NEM rates. However, from where we are in FY 24 and FY 25, we're going to start seeing increases again, but it's going to be a long time before they get up to those really high FY 23 levels. So there's a lot of movement there, and I'm hoping that my explanation of that makes some sense. Essentially, market conditions, market supply costs were high, they're declining, they're going to increase over the future, but what you're seeing in the NEM rates is the effect of the higher previous year supply market conditions to the new lower supply market conditions.
That does make sense. Thanks. Commissioner Croft?
Thanks again. Okay, I have one thing that I think it might be a typo in the financial plan. It is page 15, section 3D, packet page 274 for my packet, which was the one that was printed and delivered. It just is the transfers between the reserves. In one place it says for 25, fiscal year 25, a transfer of 20 million from the distribution operations reserve to the supply operations reserve, and I think it's supposed to be 26.
Okay.
So I think it's just a typo. And then I actually, are we in this proposal, are we talking about the reserve management practices? Can I go to that, or is that a later item?
No, you can. Can I just get that on the printed packet? Which packet page was it?
Oh, the one I just mentioned, 274, I think.
Okay, and what page of the staff report or financial plan is that?
15, page 15
Of the staff
financial
report,
plan, the
financial
financial plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Yes,
right, great. Thank you.
sure. So can I go to the reserve management practices?
Please.
Okay, the question I have is on my packet, page 364. In the appendix A, electric utility reserves management practices, section 2, the red lines, it says the electric supply fund balance is reserved for the following purposes. And it says for tracking unspent or allocated revenues, or for tracking funding of city buildings. I don't see like that language, like tracking to me is not clear what exactly that means.
Okay. Yeah, I think what's meant there is just that this is where from the accounting standpoint, unrestricted reserves, which is what pretty much all of our reserves count as unrestricted reserves, they all just go into one big pool. And
Is it for holding maybe? Or is it just, or is tracking the right word?
Yeah, we could look at using, we could look at the wording there.
It just seems unclear to me what it means. Like, are you
Yeah.
going up and down with it, like, versus just putting unspent in it?
So we use the word tracking because, again, there's this big pool of unrestricted reserves, and a portion of them are, from our perspective, restricted, but not from an accounting standpoint. And so we track that portion of the unrestricted reserves that are, from our perspective, restricted for certain regulatory purposes, in those reserves.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so
Okay, well, if it's
holding, I
not,
mean, we
if
can, we
it's
can
not
think about,
confusing to
we can
future
think about
people, then
wording.
it's okay. It just was confusing to me, but
Yeah.
thanks.
But we could consider the wording on that one.
Hey, another hopefully quick question. In the cost of service document on page 29, table 4.5, there's a comparison of load characteristics of different types of rate plans or accounts. And I'm curious about there's a big gray square in the middle of the slide. I don't know what that is.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to take some notes, but now it seems like.
Oh, I see. All right,
yeah,
don't
I
worry about it.
apologize.
What happened to the city accounts? Rate schedule E18. There used to be 29,000 megawatt hours of sales, and now it's 0. Peak demand was 76 megawatts. Now it's 0. There were 123 customers. Now there are none. Where did they all go?
Those should, that actually, we need to just remove that from the cost of service template. Last cost of service study, we eliminated the E18 rate, and we moved the city customers onto E2, E4, and E7, depending on their size. So E18 is defunct, and it's been defunct for 8 years now.
Got it. Okay. So they are spread out amongst other customer classes. They didn't all go to one type of commercial customer.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I guess I'll ask this. I'm going back and forth in my head. So in packet page 340, page 41, I guess, of the plan, it says that the total spending over the forecast period, including FY 2024 budget, is over 450 million, and 330 million is planned to be financed through debt. As of now, do we know how much of that is grid modernization?
300 million is grid modernization.
And then what's the other debt?
15 million is the Hanover substation rebuild, and 15 million is the electric utilities share of the fiber ring. The fiber ring rehabilitation.
So if I'm remembering correctly, so the numbers have gone up, right, for the grid modernization? Because I thought before it was more like 250 to 3, and that was including the other.
Yeah, it's 230 to 300 million. And the difference between those two really relies on us being able to, and I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't pretend to fully understand these, but there are certain things we may be able to do with connections between the substations that would save us a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars. And if we're able to do those things, the grid modernization cost will be a lot lower. And if we're not, it'll be a lot higher. And so we've assumed the 300 million here. And I think what we found just with financial planning over the years is that construction inflation often outstrips our best forecasts. And so I think even if we're able to see those savings from being able to make those substation changes, it's possible that we may be closer to the $300 million number when all is said and done anyway. So this is a little bit of a conservative assumption. And if we do better, we could see costs come down in the future. And I will note that because this is all debt financed, That won't be a hugely significant change in the rates. I mean, it might be a single year reduction of 1% or 2%. But I wouldn't expect that to make a wild change in the rate forecast.
Got it. Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Be ready to move? Anyone want to move to accept the staff recommendation?
I second.
Great, and just noting that it will be with the updated corrections,
Thank you.
starting with Commissioner Croft.
I approve.
I approve.
Approve.
Approve. Yes.
Approve.
And I approve. Great, thank you for that presentation, the update. We will take a 10-minute break now, so be back 8:17. Thank you, everyone. We'll now turn to item number 5 in the packet, which is the fiscal 2025 gas utility financial plan. Are there any comments from the public?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 5, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. And do we have a presentation from Ms. Bidler?
I'm just trying to get the presentation up in the shared screen. Oh, it's there. It just needs to be larger. Yes, so this is the proposed financial plan and rate changes for the gas utility. And compared with our proposal that we brought to you in January, as I mentioned earlier, the rate impacts are the same, although there have been some refinements in our cost estimates and different estimates in the plan. When we went to the Finance Committee, the members provided the general feedback of being supportive of the financial of the proposal. However, they expressed some uncertainty. The individual members each expressed some uncertainty about the gas utility transfer to the general fund. So I wanted to go through that in detail again. It's similar to what I showed you in January and ask for your feedback and recommendations on that portion, and then go through a little bit more details with you on the proposal and any questions that you have. So I'm going to jump to those items unless you'd like me to go through each slide. No, okay. So the overview of the proposal is a 9% overall rate increase in fiscal year 25, and that's holding the supply costs constant. And then the increase in the future years is 7% in 2026 and 7% in 2027 and 6% in each of the subsequent years, 28 and 29. And then we have 2 general fund transfer alternatives that I mentioned. The gas general fund transfer was approved by voters in 2022 through the Measure L, which provides for transfer of 18% of gas utility gross revenues from 2 fiscal years prior. The council may elect to transfer less. And in 2020, for fiscal year 2024, the council elected to transfer 15.5%. You'll recall that in 2023, the commodity rates increased, they spiked. And so the revenue in 2023 also spiked. And the proposal that staff is making for fiscal year 25 is to transfer 11.9% of the revenue from 2 years prior. And this will provide for a lower transfer amount and a gradual transition to the 18% transfer in 2027. And alternatively, what we're presenting is the full 18% transfer allowed under Measure L. And this slide contains a lot of detail. I'm going to go through each of the tables on the left. This is to try to explain what the 2 options are. The chart on the right shows the transfer. What I want you to focus on is fiscal year 25. So if you look at fiscal year 25 along the bottom and then follow that up to the lower line, the orange or yellow line, you can see that that's a $9 million transfer. And then if you go up to the dotted red line, that would be the 18%, and that's about a $13.6 million transfer. So that's the main point. And I'm going to go through the tables on the left to explain a little bit more detail. The first table at the top of the slide shows a summary of the rate changes that would be needed for these 2 different transfer alternatives. the transfer of 11.9% in 2025 would require a 9% rate increase. That's what we showed you in the overview slide, and that's represented in the financial plan. The 18% alternative, that's 18% of the revenue from 2 years prior, would require a 15% rate increase in 2025. The second table on the left shows the percent of gross gas utility revenue to transfer. So in 2025, it just highlights that the transfer 11.9% proposal in 2025 gradually gets up to the transfer of 18% by 2027. The transfer 18% alternative just transfers 18% each year. And that's again shown in the dotted red line on the chart on the right. And then briefly, the last two tables, the transfer amount itself in 2025, as I mentioned, with the 11.9% of gross revenues, the transfer amount is almost 9 million, the 8.960 million. And the transfer of 18% is the 13.552 million shown in that table. And the last table at the bottom of the slide shows the percent change in the transfer amount. So the transfer 11.9% is a 16% increase in 25, and the transfer 18% is a 76% increase in 25. So that was a lot of information. I would want to pause and see if there's any questions about it. Or any feedback or
Commissioner Croft.
Yeah, I mean, I am having trouble understand. Okay, so I understand that it's up to 18% in Measure L. And I guess I don't have a lot of knowledge about what the general fund is transferred for. I mean, it feels hard to make this decision unless we have, here we are making decisions, moving money in between reserves for various things that we're learning about this whole time. But the general fund, I'd be curious, what is the balance now? Where does the money come into the general fund? Is this the only source of money to the general fund? And I guess I'm missing part of the importance of how much we're transitioning to the general fund. Just need to know, like, what is, the plan for the general fund? Are we depriving it of funds, or does it have plenty of money and there's no urgency?
So Commissioner Croft, so I think the thing is that it is not the only revenues that actually go into the general fund. There are other taxes, hotel taxes, purchases that go into the general fund. This is just a portion that the utilities portion that would be transferred into the general fund. And the general fund overall is in all right shape. However, the money that is used from this this transfer portion of it goes to safety, from fire and police into programs throughout the city for city programs. It is spread amongst most of the additional services that the city provides to the community. And this money would be used for any kind of additional dollars that the council would want to move into any new programs that they would like to see, whatever they choose where this money would actually go. But those are usually the three areas that some of this money is used for.
And what do we have, what percent approximately is our transfer in of the source of funds for the general fund?
I just did a quick search online, and it said the budget included 279 million for the general fund. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's probably within ballpark.
It's gonna say 8 or 9.
That's pretty good.
So
Pretty good
you're like-
estimate.
8 or 9%?
It's a pretty good estimate.
Okay, so the difference in $4 million of $4 million is a third of that, something like that?
No, it's 4 million over 279. It's, what, 1%, 2%?
Yeah, that's,
Less. I don't.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
okay.
Sorry, you're right. Yeah, I don't, yeah, a couple percent.
Okay.
Chair, can I add something in this?
Actually, it's 1.4%, unless I screwed up the calculation.
Okay.
Can I add something on this? Yeah, another way to think of it, frankly, is this is almost the last 4 million that would come in. In other words, it's kind of discretionary. And the two kind of controversies are, number one, if you look at the differences here, plus or minus, if we go to 11.9, that's about 9 million. If we go to 18, it's 13.5. So that's about 4 million that if we don't take it, we just can't get some other things done in the city for that 4 million. The other side of the equation, however, is that, over time, we aren't going to have any gas revenue theoretically. And so when do we start kind of getting off the drug of having this all come into the general fund so that we can spend more money? It's not as big a crisis now as it would be if we were in a recession and we're having to do like we did in 20, where we're in fact, the council did lay off firemen and police and so on. So we're not in that scenario now with this quote extra $4 million, but it would be something that we wouldn't be able to do in the next fiscal year.
Where are the reserves in the electrical fund, in the gas fund, sorry, where are the reserves in the gas fund?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go through that next. Okay, let's move to that. If I can walk you through the costs and revenues, and then I'll get to the reserve charts. Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the costs and revenues for the gas utility. You can see the costs in the stacked bars, and this is representing the transfer of 11.9% with the 9% along the top. Those are the rate changes. And you can see the first red number at the top is the 9%. And then the revenue increasing over time as we try to replenish the reserve. So to your question, let's go to that slide. This is the operations reserve for the gas utility. At the end of 2023, the reserve was within the guideline range, but is expected to go below the minimum at the end of 2024. And partly that's because of costs increasing, and partly that's because of certain costs that were associated with 2023, but didn't happen until 2024. So that we were expecting them to happen in 23. And we actually, last year, so then the operations reserve would come back to within the guideline range at the end of 2026. And although this looks bad, it is actually a slightly better projection than we were making last year at this time. So it's a year earlier of recovery, and it doesn't dip quite so low. But it's still very low and below the minimum guideline level. And this is the rest of the reserves. So you can see the operations reserve is in orange, the bars at the bottom of the chart. The supply rate stabilization reserve is in green. And it was negative at the end of 2023, but we typically look at the supply and supply rate stabilization. There's sufficient funds in the operations reserve to replenish the supply rate stabilization reserve. And then the CIP reserve is in the top bars with the striped blue. And you can see that that is also very low at the moment, but plan to bring it back up to within the guideline range. And I think there's a chart of that too. No. I can find a chart of that if you are interested in seeing it. But that brings me to the gas rate recommendation. Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment on that one. It's in, oops, I lost it. Table 3 in the packet, but it looks like the CIP reserve doesn't get back to within range until 2028. It seems like, we've taken a lot of risk letting that slide for 5 years.
Yeah, I think there's no funds in the CIP reserve right now. And so we're bringing, the reserve guidelines say that we have to propose a plan to bring it back to within the guideline range within a certain time period. I think it's within the 5-year period, but I need to check that. So in all of our proposals, we're trying to gradually bring the reserves back to within guideline range into the target by the end of the 5-year period. But that's we'll note that concern of yours that.
I think it's kind of an unforced error that, if something bad happens in the meantime, that requires us to, invest more in capital, and having the reserve not within bounds at the same time. It's, anyway, my thought would be that we should work to find a way to get that back within bounds faster than 2028.
Okay, we'll look at that.
I kind of agree with that. And on those charts, when you show reserves, what would be really helpful is if you had the reserve ranges, not just the dollar amount on the graph, but what the actual range is, because it's hard to tell. So if you go back one. Right, so when you look at this, I mean, you can see if it's negative, but I can see an operations reserve has whatever, $15 million. I don't know if that's the minimum, if that's the maximum, or anywhere in between. So it'd be great to have the range on this chart.
We can try to work on that.
Councilmember Lowing actually just made me think of something. So with the Berkeley decision saying that we have to provide new hookups, I don't see us shutting down our gas utility. I don't see how you would do that. And so we still talk about that we might shut down our gas utility, but we're not going to shut down our gas utility as long as that's the law. I don't see it. People will continue to get. And so I'm just wondering if there's been some rethinking of what we're thinking about gas and our SCAP, the whole thing. I think that's a discussion that, I don't know if council's starting to have that discussion or if we're just pretending it's not, things haven't changed. So I was sort of curious as to where the utilities were, and love you to weigh in, Councilmember Lau.
Thanks for giving me an easy one.
Always.
That legal action against Berkeley was a blow to the dates, even for the SCAP overall, let alone, a gas shutdown. And there are a lot of citizens that are, of course, concerned about that. Council's concerned about that. As you know, there's a group of citizens that's actually wanting an answer to the question of what year are we going to shut this down so that we have that goal and don't take our foot off the accelerator using our gas or using our electric when we're on the accelerator, I don't know which, but so that we have something in mind and we can adjust it later. But we need a few practical things in place before we can do that, like the infrastructure that you folks are working on, and the ability to wean people off electricity, and when
You mean off gas?
Off gas and put in electricity, and when the courts are overruling what we've already decided, that's a blow. So we have to take that on. As you know, we're trying to come up fast with alternatives, as well as just jawboning, negotiating, of saying to developers, you see, electricity is better for you, not just the environment in terms of cost and all that. So it's a bit of a new world with that new decision from I think it's the Ninth Circuit Court.
Right, it's the Ninth Circuit.
Yep.
Fair, but it seems like, and I don't want to go too far afield, but I'm even looking at this and it's saying on packet page 379, projected declines in gas usage of Palo Alto from 0.5% annually from 025 to 029 and projected declines in commodity prices, yet the revenue line kind of keeps going up and and that, it doesn't seem like we really have our arms around this. We're expecting the revenue to go up, presumably making while the usage and the cost is going down. It doesn't compute to me. Maybe in a new world, it won't go down because of the circuit court decision, but I think, council does need to visit this.
I'll get Jonathan in a minute. So if I could just add to Councilmember Lowing. So there was a conversation with council just recently about this as we went through and we talked about the moratorium that we put in place. The council asked staff to come back to them to have a further discussion on this. And we are going to have this as one of the items that's in their objectives that we'll be bringing back next Monday to have a conversation about other options that we might be able to look at. There are other cities that have different rules than what we followed through Berkeley. And so our staff is looking at those to see if there's options for us to move forward with, as some of these other cities have taken. We are going to bring back some options back to council with what we find in the studies that we're looking at today. So, Jonathan, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that we don't have the I think when we were talking about the electric, we talked about the real deep uncertainties in the rate of electrification retrofits. And, regardless of what happens with the REACH code, we're still going to encourage retrofits through voluntary programs. We're going to try and achieve these goals as quickly as we can. But there's a lot of uncertainty and we don't have that incorporated into the gas financial plans right now. We have two studies going on right now. One is a gas transition planning study that's going to address both the infrastructure sequencing of, how you would trim back the gas system, and then also the way you would deal with declining sales. There are some savings that can happen in operations. We looked at this a couple of years back that could mitigate some of the declines in sales. On the other hand, if people don't, move to all electric homes, you can't take advantage of those infrastructure issues. So we're going to look at all that in that gas transition planning study. And then we have the SCAP funding study that's also going to look at funding sources for these issues and different solutions. So what we might end up with things like alternate funding sources to keep the gas system running safely under declining revenues, transfers between utilities approved by voters. I don't know what the solution is going to be, but it's not in this gas financial plan. The thinking is going on, though. It's just not reflected in this gas financial plan.
Thank you.
So the staff recommendation is for the UIC to recommend that the council adopt a resolution approving the financial plan, transferring 11.9% of the gas utility gross revenues in 2025 and making the amendments to the rate schedules proposed in the packet.
I'll move it.
Can we have a little bit more discussion before we vote on it?
Oh, sure.
If we second it, do we close the opportunity for discussion? All right, I'll second and then I'll comment. So you brought here an alternative with 18%. And was that on request of the Finance Committee?
No.
No. that was just for illustrative purposes?
Uh,
I guess I'm kind of curious if there's any interest in amongst the UAC or from others that you've talked to about pursuing a higher general fund transfer.
Go ahead, go.
No, this is the same proposal that we came to you with in January. And then, so the Measure L allows for the 18% transfer, so that is why
Right.
we're showing that. And then the council direction from last year during the budget process was to gradually transition to the 18% over time.
Got
So
it. I
that's
misunderstood.
where-
I thought that it was that after the UAC discussion, the finance committee had said, hey, would you run an alternative?
No, this
the
is the
full-
same, and it's the
Got it.
same that what we showed the finance committee and the same that what we showed the UAC.
So all momentum leads towards 11.9 at this point.
Well, I think that when we went to finance this last time, I think they're struggling like you are. There was no recommendation coming back from the finance group that they were landing on the 18% or the 12%, 11.9. And so they asked us, of course, to bring it back. They wanted to hear back a little bit more from the UAC to see what they were thinking about. But there was no alternative other than, as Lisa just mentioned, was to show you both. And if you remember, this goes back on a 2-year timeframe. And so this is the spike year.
Right.
So, and that's the reason why transfer is a little higher than what it probably would normally be.
Right. It occurs to me, it seems worth thinking about, especially given the rulings in Berkeley and talking about the COSA and how our hands are tied to do policy through rate making. This is a lever to make gas prices be relatively higher than electricity prices, and as a potential motivational tool to affect to affect electrification through prices that customers experience. I mean, I'm almost afraid to say it, but because nobody ever wants to raise rates on anything, but it's just worth putting out there that it would have that policy side effect if there was any appetite for transferring a larger amount.
I guess I look at the chart, and this is on packet page 462, and even going with the 18%, it's only like a 1-year impact in the rates. So it's hard for me to think, that would be a pretty substantial shock because we're looking at a 15% rate increase, 24 to 25. And it's just that 1 year, which doesn't seem to me like it's going to lead to, a lot of long-term changes. So I guess from my point of view, trying to think prudentially about the gas rates, I mean, I can't say 11.9% is the magic number versus 11.85%, but it does seem to me to be easier on the consumers who aren't going to have the short run opportunity to switch to gas. It does help while still refilling the reserves. And of course, the council, if the council says, my God, no, we need this money for the general fund because we're going to be laying off firemen, which Councilmember Lowing said is not the case right now. Of course, they can always come back and instruct, that they want 18%. It's up to them. But I think I like the 11.9 as being, prudential. And I think it's our role to think about the utility side and the council's role to think about the general fund health.
Commissioner Croft?
Yeah, actually,
You're frozen.
Meeting without it.
Do you want to try turning off the video and see if it works? Well, while we wait for Commissioner Croft, what I had one comment, although that's an interesting thought that hadn't crossed my mind, frankly, about the higher transfer having some impact on behavior, but I worry that it's too short a time, but it's something to think about to, I don't know, help. I don't know what the messaging is to customers, but I like the idea of encouraging behavior in these limited places where we have opportunity to do it. But my bigger concern is that the reserves are really not in good shape. And I thought that one of them, let's see, the operations reserve was going to be below the guideline range for us, let's see, the CIP, but longer than is permitted without approval. The council can approve it, but when we're at a level where we need extra approval for the to be below the risk assessment of our reserves, that tells me that if we're gonna charge more to customers, I'd like to see it go to our financial health, frankly, in the utility. So I would be more in favor of the lower transfer, especially in light of the extra boom from the gas rates last year. Are you back, Commissioner Croft?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I have, in my effort to save electricity, I have an automatic turn off on my desk plugs, so I apologize. I had been thinking through the issue of shutting off the gas and you know, the conversations we've had in the past about as people go fully electric, you know, the cost of the people who remain on gas is going to go up. And now I'm thinking, oh yeah, if we have to do cost of service assessment, there's gonna be a higher cost and lower number of customers. So I would think that the rates will go up to incentivize people to switch over to gas, or sorry, switch over to electric. It was just an observation. So I was thinking that eventually I think there would be a natural incentive. So I think that's my impression. And if someone wants to confirm that for me, that would be great. But it would make me think, okay, well, I'm okay with a lower number now, knowing that eventually that kind of, you know, incentive is going to be naturally occurring at a later date. And I did have one question about our kind of long-term plan for gas. I did notice in the report that it talks through, you know, the material used for the mains has changed multiple times over the years, which was very interesting to me. But I also was wondering, you know, what is the expected life of, I think we're now mostly PVC, moving to PE, I think. But what is our strategy? I mean, are we taking a long-term approach? Like we have a policy of the gas lines can't be over X years, and we're putting in the longest duration material that we know works. What is kind of our utility strategy, knowing that we have no end date for gas at this point?
So Commissioner Croft, so life expectancy on our new HD pipe that we put in is about 100 years. And we are in the process of changing out PVC pipe. There's approximately about 38 more miles of that needs to be replaced. And then it's on to the steel pipe to replace the rest of that. And so the long-term plan is to go high-density polyethylene pipe throughout the city.
Okay, and when approximately will we be fully on that material?
I don't either. So 38 miles.
It's probably
I was thinking, Commissioner Croft, we'll have to get back to you on that one to figure out that timeline. We do have that, but I don't have it on my fingertips. Sorry.
Okay, no problem at all.
Any other questions? Or are we ready to? move on this?
No, I'm good. I just wanted to ask a thought-provoking question, but well, the vote will tell whether we're aligned on the staff recommendation. I will say I share the concerns about the reserve. That's a recurring theme tonight.
So I guess, did you want to have a separate 18% vote then? Okay.
So it's already been seconded.
Okay. So we can vote on the gas rate recommendation as proposed with an 11.9% transfer into the general fund and the rate increases as provided in the packet. We can go, I'll do something different.
Wow.
Yes.
Approved. Yes.
Approved. I vote yes.
Commissioner Croft?
I approve.
And I approve as well. Great. So we will move on to item 6, which is the water utility.
I'll ask for public comments. This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 6, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
I think you're doing another presentation.
Yes, I'll try to keep it brief and focus on what you're interested in. But I wanted to go over some of the changes for the water utility since we last spoke in January and since last year. Since that time, SFPUC has announced that they're proposing to increase the rate in July 1st of 6.5%. So that's reflected in the proposal. And additionally, as we went through and updated all of our cost estimates with updated inflation estimates for operations at about 4% and for CIP at about 5.4%, we increased our cost estimates. And at the same time, sales have continued at a lower level than we anticipated last year due to the drought and due to the wet weather, and have not come back as from the drought. There's been not as much rebound as we had expected. And so now our sales forecast is lower in the future. So the distribution rate increase proposal is 13%. Together with the SFPUC increase of 6.5%, that combines into a total water rate change for customers of 10%. Let me go through some of the details of that. This is the cost and revenue chart, similar to the other utilities that we've talked about, and you can see the 10% in the first red number at the top. You can see the blue line, or the line that's at the top, is declining in 2023, and we are projecting that it will come back in 2024 and in future years. But you can see that declined a little bit more than we thought it would. And then you can see the main increases are in the water supply costs, the blue bars at the bottom. We also have increases in operating costs and capital costs. We typically try to show the capital costs remaining steady each year. However, because of one-time costs for 2 reservoirs that need to be replaced, and those costs are showing in 27 and 28. That's why those 2 orange bars showing capital costs are higher in those 2 particular years. This is the operations reserve, and although it is within the guideline range throughout the forecast period, and although it's near to the bottom of the range, it does return to the target by the end of the 5-year period. The CIP reserve is, I just want to comment that it does dip down a little bit in fiscal year 28 when that second tank capital cost happens at the same time as a main replacement in that same year, water main replacement. But it is projected to return right away in 29 to within the guideline range and remain within the guideline range after that. Oops. I unshared accidentally, 1 sec. So this chart is showing a little bit more detail about the water operations cost changes over time. And it shows the debt service and transfers. There is one larger bar there for 2024 where there's a true up happening in one particular CIP project for GIS. So that's why that bar is a little bit higher. The resource management is the next bar in the solid color that's purple. And then, each of the other categories really shows a steady increase over time as inflation is increasing the costs. And there's several slides here with bill impacts and other details that we could be happy to talk about. I was going to show you the recommendation similar to the other utilities where we're requesting that the UAC recommend that the council adopt a resolution approving the financial plan and then the changes to the rate schedules. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for this presentation. I have a question sort of broadly about demand projections, because in water, like that is absolutely your most sensitive, well, the financial health of the utility is most sensitive to demand. Palo Alto is not the most water efficient city, and other cities have followed sort of changes in demand over time on a like a resident per resident basis, given the mix of commercial and residential activity that we have. And I'm wondering whether we've taken time to study how other cities' demands have fallen off and whether that ends up helping us project long-term demand in a more sort of at a more granular basis than using historic projections outward. If the answer is no, that's okay, but I think it would be helpful to understand really what has gone into these demand projections to make sure that the reserves actually do return to normal over this 5-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say long term, like if you look at every other city, everyone projects their demands to be too high over and over and over again. And maybe Palo Alto, there's good reasons to think that Palo Alto is different in that respect, but I'd love to hear from you specifically about where you think, how confident you are in your demand projections right now.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing you ask, I think you asked for us to look for examples and look for like lessons learned in other cities and how their demands are changing and whether there's ways we can better make our demands more efficient in Palo Alto and then maybe also improve our forecasting for demand.
It's more specifically about forecasting. Like
forecasting.
I mean, this is
Okay.
not a conversation about water efficiency, right? This is about
Mhm.
setting rates. And
Mhm.
if it's about setting rates, then it's really about getting your demand forecast nailed down as accurately as possible.
One thing that might help the discussion, if I can show you the chart of our purchase forecast that's used underlying this financial plan, and then I can kind of explain that to you and tell you the process that we use to come up with it.
Sure. I actually just want like, how good of a job are we doing in benchmarking, like the range of efficiency or, okay, the range of consumption vis-a-vis other cities who have maybe undergone more like having lower per capita consumption after having started in a higher per capita consumption place? If
I think I'm a little confused about
okay,
the
I'm sorry.
question, because as your question, are we going to be like other cities, or is your question, how accurate is our forecasting
It's
been?
about how accurate our forecasts are. So let's go to the forecast. Yes, if you could go to the forecast method that we're using, that would be awesome.
Okay, so this shows the water supply purchase forecast. It doesn't show the sales units, but this is the purchases. And it shows in the gray line, it shows actuals in the blue on the left. And then it shows our projection from the financial plan last year in the gray line. And you can see that in 2023, the actual purchases were lower than what we projected. We did have a range. We had two different projections. We had a low end and a moderate end, and we selected the moderate one for the forecast. And it turned out it was lower in 2023. So now we're looking at that and we're saying, we think it will not actually come back up to the level that it was before. And we think that it will take a little bit longer to get there. And that's really more of a, we're not really using regression or something like that to get to that conclusion. It's more based on looking at what our forecast was last year and what we think it could be this year, and looking at the long-term trend. So in the long term, like 10 years, long term. So in the 10-year period, there's been about a 1% decline per year of the demand. So we took that as one data point, and then we added on top of that there's been an increase because of COVID over the last few years. So then we think that will, there's different forces increasing or decreasing the forecast, and we kind of applied those different percentages on top of each other and came up with this forecast. So for our rate setting purposes, we think this is, reasonable that over the next couple of years, there'll be a little bit of recovery from the drought, but we won't necessarily experience the type of recovery that we were projecting before, and then we'll resume with the downward trend. Now, we do work with Bosca and do much more sophisticated demand projections on a per capita basis by customer class. They build up from an end use and look at not only per device and per fixture, what the use is going to look like, and they build a much more complicated forecast across the different cities, and then taking into account the building code standards and conservation programming that the cities project, and then taking into account growth. And I'd say that that's a bit more of a longer term forecast that's used for supply purposes. And here we're trying to really make sure that we accomplish our I guess I forget how you put it exactly, but that we really make sure that we're replenishing the reserves and doing what's prudent here for financial purposes.
And so those Bosca projections, do they cover granularly on an annual basis between now and 2029?
No, those projections are done every 5 years. Okay. To prepare for the urban water management plan. So you can look at our urban water management plan. I think you have a longer term forecast there that I think begins, the forecast began, I think, in 2021, and I think went through 2045.
Okay.
Or maybe 2040.
Okay. But your long-term declines in usage are aligned with the long-term declines projected by Bosca?
No.
No. Okay.
The declines that we're using here are from the last 10 years, where we've seen those type of declines, maybe due to a lot of different factors, the economy, the drought, another drought on top of that, these sort of more short-term things. In the urban water management plan, we have a decline in the demand on a per capita basis, but we have to take into account the city's growth that's planned. And so that makes the per capita decline into an increase when you kind of layer those things together.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. Yeah.
This may be a related question. I'm sorry, did I? I was just reading the sentence on page 2 of the staff report where it says, while these rate increases can be perceived as decreasing the benefit of conservation, bills for customers who conserve will be lower in the future than they would have been without conservation. I read that 3 times. There's a similar sentence later on. I think it means that because usage is declining, the costs, the non-supply related costs are being amortized over a smaller amount of usage. Therefore, rates are going up as they tend to do in the so-called pre-death spiral thing. But is that what that means?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's trying to say, but it's also trying to say that an individual who conserves will save on their
So
bill.
it's a two-part thing. It's saying because
Yes.
there's less usage, the rates have to go up to support the capital base. But of course, every individual who uses less will always be better off. So it's
Yes.
like a prisoner's dilemma. They're better off, but everybody else is worse off.
Well, they're better off this year.
Yeah.
5 years later, they're worse off.
And everybody's worse off
Yeah, no,
because
they're continually
because
worse
the
off
rates
in
go up.
terms of money. Absolutely.
Yep.
Commissioner Croft?
Yeah, I was trying to find the number, but I realized I think it's on my computer from the electronic version. But could you just tell us what is the breakdown of usage, commercial versus residential? Volume of water?
Yes,
Oh, there we
so
go. Okay.
the usage, you can see, this is broken out by rate class. And so the commercial section of the chart includes master meter multifamily. But based upon this breakdown, commercial is about 41% of the water usage.
Okay, so this is actually a perfect chart for the question I had. So I was just trying to identify if there's a bigger target. For me, water seems like, it's a finite resource. Unlike the other utilities where you can buy more. I mean, I know it's finite, but California itself has limited water supply. So it is, to me, a little bit of a shame that you have to follow a cost of service when you really want to incentivize people to use less. But my question is, I saw the comparison of the residential rates to the neighboring cities and of the commercial rates to the neighboring cities. And the residential rates are quite a bit, like I think it said 11% higher, whereas the commercial rates are 2% higher. And it looks like the rate increases are equal in the residential and the commercial groups. I wonder, so that the increase is boosting the same in both groups. So I wonder if there was any consideration given to possibly increasing the commercial rates a little bit higher than the residential rates just to kind of mirror other cities, or are we following cost of service assessment that says what the breakdown needs to be? Because here it says, residential use 48, but they pay 49% of the revenues.
Thanks for that question. And we have not completed a cost of service study this year, but we will be completing a cost of service study in the next 1 to 2 years. And we are setting the rates based upon the cost of service. in the cost of service study that was completed in around 2021, the consultant looked at different factors and came up with these rate changes or the rates for each customer class based upon the factors like Jonathan was talking about, the different factors of each customer class, the usage and the peak usage and number of customers. And we're not making changes to that at this time.
So basically the allocation, once you have the cost of service, you kind of have to, when you're raising the rates, you raise them kind of uniformly according to that prior cost of service. Is that fair to say?
That is what we're doing. Yeah.
Okay.
One thought just crossed my mind. If I recall, water usage is split pretty evenly between outdoor and indoor usage, at least for residential. Is that right?
I think we don't know completely for sure, but I think it's probably a little bit more indoor, like maybe 60%, 55%.
Okay, so then maybe this doesn't apply because as weather gets more extreme, when we have these very wet years, we're probably not seeing as much outdoor water usage. And then if it's very dry years, you may be seeing indoor conservation and mandatory outdoor conservation. So I don't know how that changes the demand curve, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't know. We're assuming that the maintained decline in usage was sort of behavior left over from a drought. And I don't know if that's it, or it's just that we have so much outdoor water that's kind of hiding whether behaviors come back or, whether usage has come back pre-drought or not.
It's helpful thought. I don't know. I think we'll find out more as we get into the irrigation season this year, but we'll try to take a close look at that.
Any other? Yeah, I guess no other comment. Commissioner Croft, your hand is up. Was that from before? Or do you have another question?
Yeah, that was from before. I'm fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we can.
Then I move we accept the staff's recommendations regarding the water rates.
I second.
Yes.
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 Commissioner Croft?
Yes.
And yes, I approve as well. So thank you for that. We will move on to commissioner comments and reports from meetings and events. Are there any commissioner comments, reports?
I'm attending a conference at Berkeley next Friday on energy policy. I think I had Janelle send it out to, I think you did, to the other commissioners. I've already learned quite a bit from this. What I learned was that there's a budget for attending these conferences. So I didn't either. So even before going to the conference, it's been a tremendous learning experience for me. And the process, I think, is to contact Janelle. Is that the process?
And I would just say sooner's better because there's an early bird rate. I don't know when that cutoff is, but.
Tomorrow, but I was thinking about conferences in general. It's not just for this conference.
And I saw we are a sponsor of this conference. Does that mean that the utility gets a discount for us for being a sponsor or a certain number of seats?
I don't think we know here, but there is sort of a utility discount, as I understand. Is it a
There's a
nonprofit?
government.
There's a governmental.
Government
Yeah.
discount. So
On-
there's an
on
early
this.
bird and a discount for government.
Got it.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in specifically for that one, the sooner the better, and then any other related events, I guess. Keep that in mind. Any other commissioner? Any future topics for upcoming meetings?
So one that Chair Sigel that I had down was that the commission would like to take a look at the reserve management policy. So I have that one down. I just added.
Yeah, reserve management and maybe even just, yeah, a broader discussion on reserves and the purpose of
I
that.
think Councilmember Lowing had a potential speaker to speak to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, the assistant city manager who has also been the CFO here for about 5 years, I think. So she knows this inside and out because she's been managing both the auditor as well as the financial plan each year.
Yeah, I for one would encourage it and find it very useful.
And then I might reiterate Mr. Cole's comment to say we're probably due for a discussion from Jonathan Blake or whoever the appropriate person is on the permitting side. It's been a while.
Can I bring up something? I see on the city council schedule, there is an item that is pad mounted electric equipment, and I'm wondering what that is and whether we should get that update too.
So that is a contract that we put an RFP out and that will be going to council for approval for just buying pad mounted transformers and switches.
Okay, so it doesn't have to do with like the pad mounted equipment that will go into our underground cities as we above ground our transformers.
It does. So as we talked about, I think I mentioned it last month in my grid mod update that we are going to have to replace some of the smaller pad mount transformers that are throughout the city. And this is addressing buying these transformers and getting approval through the council. It's about $750,000 of a contract.
Okay, so I guess the topic of pad mounted transformers is of interest to me. So not necessarily this budget item, but just learning about what the plan is. I think we've heard what size they are approximately, but there's going to be the discussion about where exactly they are located in underground neighborhoods. So understanding and the plan would be something I'd be interested in.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one sort of meta calendar discussion, which is we have a long list of items that we've agreed to put on the calendar that are listed, but not calendared. They don't have dates. So I'd like to request that we, work to calendar them. Yep.
What's that?
Great. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
I think we can do it by
second.
voice vote.
Yes,
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.